Get proactive and pass this resolution now.
Right now on ABC 10 News at 4 o'clock, growing calls nationwide and here at home following the conviction of a former police officer in the murder of George Floyd. The demands for police reform. Plus, 200 million shots and counting, the president's new incentive for businesses in order to get more Americans vaccinated. And an in-depth look at how being active can benefit those still waiting to be vaccinated.
ABC 10 News at 4 starts now.
With George Floyd and the conviction, that while that's great, we got a lot of work to do.
Just a day after a Minnesota police officer was convicted for murdering George Floyd, local civil rights activists are calling for government leaders to act now. Thank you for joining us. I'm Kimberly Hunt. ABC 10 News reporter Rena Nakano explains their demands for police reform.
Unintentional second-degree murder while committing a felony. Find the defendant guilty.
Former police officer Derek Chauvin guilty on all 3 charges in the death of George Floyd. It was the verdict community advocate Cornelius Bowser was expecting.
I think that he should get the maximum penalty for this.
But he says that verdict is only the first step into police reform, not just in Minnesota, but around the country.
Let's move our region forward toward reimagining policing in San Diego and toward building the bridge between law enforcement and the community.
Shane Harris of the People's Association of Justice held a joint press conference with community advocates demanding local leaders to pass a resolution of the Congressional George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. This would create an independent process to investigate police misconduct or excessive force, establish a federal registry of police misconduct complaints and disciplinary actions, grant funds to local agencies for anti-discrimination training programs, and prohibit no-knock warrants, chokeholds, carotid holds, among others.
That bill will really bring some radical changes, or at the very least reimagine policing, what it should look like, and set the model and example.
Many procedural changes have already been implemented locally since Floyd's death. In June, every law enforcement agency in the county banned the use of the controversial carotid restraint. And in November, San Diegans voted to have an independent body with subpoena powers to review police conduct. Bowser believes the change needs to begin from within.
We know that it's a culture, it's a belief, it's a practice, an implicit bias that police have about our community that creates that problem.
Rena Nakano, ABC 10 News.
Coming up at 5 o'clock, we'll hear from the San Diego Police Officers Association, their reaction to the verdict and the future of police reform.
The Justice Department has already begun to reach out to community groups and members of the public to learn about their experiences with the MPD. We also seek to hear from the department's officers about the training and support they receive, because their perspective is essential. All these voices will help provide investigators the information they need to conduct a comprehensive assessment.
Today, Attorney General Merrick Garland announced an investigation into the behavior of Minneapolis police. Federal investigators will assess whether the department has a pattern of using excessive force during arrests and protests, how often officers engage in discriminatory conduct, and whether its treatment of people with behavioral disabilities violates the law. The guilty verdict in the trial of Derek Chauvin is sparking new hope for improvements in how police departments operate across the country. New polling conducted within hours of yesterday's verdicts shows 71% of people agreed with the jury's decisions. And while 62% of people in that same poll said they plan to accept the verdicts and not protest, there's still a nationwide push to modernize policing. But could this case help kickstart that modernization? We spoke to Kurt Burkhalter, a 20-year NYPD veteran who's now a law professor. He said, while this case could be a turning point for policing in our country, there's still work to be done.
You have a large segment of the community that just don't necessarily trust the police. They don't give the police the benefit of the doubt, and that needs to be restored if we are going to move forward.
Burkhalter says the troubles with policing are multidimensional. He believes a major component of any change has to be updating police culture and reassessing the types of calls to which officers are dispatched.
The country has moved forward into the 21st century. However, police departments are kind of stuck back in the 80s and 90s, and we have to move away from this occupying force mode into more of a public service mode.
Burkhalter is the director of the New York Law School's 21st Century Policing Project. He says revamping training is key to enacting constructive change, from a switch to undergraduate-style education programs for officers to requiring more in-the-field training. And while kickstarting the change could be challenging, Burkhalter believes small steps will make the transition easier.
The largest hindrance is holding on to outmoded ideas. We all get very comfortable. You know, it's like an old shoe or an old shirt, right? You don't want to get rid of it because it's been so comfortable. But once you put on that new shirt, those new shoes, it's like, oh my goodness, what have I been wearing these last 10 or 20 years?
He says any systemic change would likely start with smaller departments and gradually expand to bigger cities. But Burkhalter says the change can't stop with police, and he's hopeful that everyone will do their part by thinking about how we treat others, by listening, and by speaking up when we see something that just doesn't seem right.
After hitting the benchmark of 200 million vaccines administered today, President Biden is now focusing on getting even more shots into arms. Today, he announced a tax credit to give small and medium-sized businesses up to $500 per employee for vaccine-related time off. That includes getting the shot and time to recover from any side effects.
No working American should lose a single dollar from their paycheck because they chose to fulfill their patriotic duty of getting vaccinated.
Case counts are slowly on the decline nationwide, but the CDC director warns the U.S. is at risk of losing our progress, citing the 700 deaths reported on Sunday alone. And she urges Americans not to get lax with COVID safety measures. San Diego County is making promising strides in the fight against COVID. We are receiving more doses to the county, and the case rate for California is the lowest in the country. ABC 10 News reporter Jennifer De La Cruz explains where there's still work to be done.
In a press conference Wednesday, County Supervisor Nathan Fletcher asking San Diegans to remain vigilant.
Now is the time as we're doing our recovery. Kids are going back to school, businesses are reopened. We want to continue to be a leader, to be safe, to be strong.
This week, they received about 300,000 doses. That's up from 200,000 last week. Supervisor Nora Vargas says they're making sure everyone has access to the vaccine.
We continue to place equity at the forefront with continued efforts to increase vaccination rates, especially in hard-to-reach communities.
Earlier this week, the county opened a second monoclonal antibody center to treat COVID-19 patients in Chula Vista. The first at Palomar Medical Center has treated nearly 200 patients so far. While demand for vaccines remains high, Supervisor Fletcher says at some point that will drop off. The county said they're using education and outreach to change the minds of those still skeptical about getting a shot.
They said it was too soon, and that was a concern in December or January. But given where we are now, I think that's probably less of a concern. We'll do aggressive outreach and work and continue to make sure it's available to everyone.
Jennifer De La Cruz, ABC 10 News.
The county says it's expecting an update on whether or not to restart the Johnson & Johnson vaccine by the end of the week. And here are the latest vaccination numbers in San Diego County. 42% of all San Diegans are now fully vaccinated. That's more than 846,000 people. Chula Vista police are joining forces with several law enforcement agencies in the disappearance of Maya Miliete. The mother of three has been missing for over 3 months. She was last seen by family members at her home in East Chula Vista. Her family and the community have been out every weekend since to search for her. Today, the Chula Vista Police Department announced it is partnering with the San Diego County District Attorney's Office, the FBI, and the Naval Criminal Investigative Service to find her.
For months, demand for the COVID-19 vaccine was outpacing supply. But now that we have the supply, demand is expected to hit a tipping point. The Kaiser Family Foundation is predicting that will happen in the next 2 to 4 weeks. That means efforts to encourage vaccination and reach herd immunity will become more difficult. The health officials say if demand slows down now, it could give variants more of a chance to spread and mutate. New data from the World Health Organization shows global case numbers hit a new record last week.